This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Oh. They really don't make spring water like they used to. Maybe it's the plastic. In fact, no, I know for a fact it's the plastic. God. Anything to kill off society faster. I still love poking fun at coworkers who actually think that Cleveland tap water is good. I don't care what they say, man. Tap water is tap water. I don't care if it's Cleveland tap water or Nigerian tap water. It still tastes bitter. I can literally feel the estrogen running down my throat every time I drink that crap. It's always hard when I go out of town, but I always make it a mission to drink spring water as much as I can. Which, again, when you have to buy bottles of it, I mean, how much healthier is it really? At that point, I may as well just bring a Brita filter with me everywhere I go. But even this spring water I'm drinking is very mid. It's got a flavor to it, which I know is not supposed to be a thing. Unless you're drinking Dasani. Or what's the other brand? Aquafina. I don't know what brand this is, but I typically buy those 2.5 gallon jugs at Walmart because, I go through water like crazy, especially for all my gym workouts. Meanwhile, I'm still digging this Saratoga. It's actually not half bad. I don't drink it every day, but every now and then, a carbonated water beverage, it really hits the spot. And Lord knows I'm going to need it to get through today's podcast. I've got 2 days of freedom until the church chaos begins. Wednesday to Sunday, baby. Non-stop services. Which I'm actually looking forward to because, well, A, we're doing a lot of good music with the choir. And B, I'm getting paid. It's always nice to have a side gig that pays and consists of something you're passionate about. I really am living the best life right now, man. I got 3 different jobs, all of which are music related in some capacity. They're all unique gigs. It took a full year of moving to Ohio to really get situated. But I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. I got a nice place I'm living in. Commutes aren't bad anymore. And I'm still staying busy. But I like it. Lord knows it's hard enough for me to remain optimistic. Especially as I get older. I always have been kind of a deep skeptic. I am waiting for the inevitable downfall of humanity. We're on the right path now with the continual decline of the birth rate. My contributions to fixing the problem? letting it all burn and sitting on the sidelines just telling people, yup, told you this would happen. But we're not here to talk about the collapse of society and things that guys like Chris Williamson are more qualified to preach about. We're here to talk about wrestling, classic wrestling, here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Today we've got retro WCW and Midsouth to get into. I said I was going to make the show happen this week. As of the current time you're seeing this go up, it will go up Friday. How I plan to edit the whole thing, that I'm still trying to iron out the details. It's probably going to consist of a very long Thursday night. I honestly might just start editing things tomorrow after I record the Midsouth segment. It'll make things less hectic. We'll see. Depends on how much energy I have. First, I got to get through the WCW portion of the show. So let's get into it. Try not to get bogged down too much. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm of the opinion that these syndicated TBS shows are really starting to fall off a cliff. And if you know about the timeline of events with WCW in 1990, there was some shift changes going on with the booking committee right around this time. I'm like 99% sure Flair had already given his notice of quitting the booking team, which basically left nobody at the helm in terms of good decision making. And when Jim Herd wound up becoming the sole authority of the team, everyone else may as well have been designated coffee fetchers, because they had no final say. To be honest, I still don't even know who was all part of the booking committee by this point. It was like all the Jims plus Kevin Sullivan, Terry Funk, and I think Ole was a part of the crew. Although he still wasn't the head of the booking team yet. That came later on. It's a complete disaster. And the shows reflect it. These syndicated programs are becoming more and more tedious with each passing week. Like, tedious in the sense that there's usually 20 to 30 minutes of reasonably good material, and then the rest of the show is comparable to cable access television at times. Just one wretched segment after another. In terms of the stuff that I would deem reasonably okay, that's everything surrounding what they're doing with the world title picture. And there's actually an important thing to mention when it comes to the Ric Flair-Lex Luger feud. And we talked about them having to rapidly shift things around when Sting blew out his ACL in February, which is how we got the hotshot Luger face turn and everything that came in the build to Wrestle War. Here's the thing, though, and most people would never know this unless you hear it directly from guys like Flair from over the years, or even Jim Cornette when he did his kayfabe commentary docuseries. They did want Flair to drop the belt to Luger, but because Flair promised he would do the honors for Sting, he didn't want to drop the belt to Luger beforehand. And there was a whole thing that happened where Flair showed up to a venue, I think it was in Chicago actually. They were going to have Flair drop the title to Luger without ever consulting him about it first. And Flair basically put the kibosh on that and said, "Yeah, that doesn't work for me, brother." And that, I think, was the final straw for Flair deciding to resign from the booking committee after that point. I mean, he already knew that Jim Herd was always going to be a thorn in his side no matter what. At that point, he decided, fuck it. It ain't worth it. Now, obviously, they had to carry the Luger-Flair feud into Capital Combat in May, which is what Jim Ross and Jim Cornette set up during their opening pitch, where they suggested that the only way for them to settle their issues is inside a cage. So that was a selling point to try and boost intrigue for the pay-per-view in a couple months. So there's all that. That's the reasonably good stuff that's currently happening on the show right now. And then there's everything involving Norman and the Black Box, which is... I mean, it's horrible for all the reasons I broke down the other week. It's even worse when you come to realize that the whole thing was literally being done as a cheap publicity stunt to try to pop a TV rating for like 2 or 3 weeks. As if that was going to be the ultimate difference maker in gaining fans' interest back. Let's do a wacky storyline with somebody popping out of a mystery box. Now, they all but confirmed during Norman's interview with JR that there is a person inside the box. And in fact, Norman outright told us who it was. He said it's the Boogeyman. And while that might have actually been a pretty cool visual to see the actual Boogeyman make a cameo in WCW in 1990, it was not the Boogeyman that you're probably thinking of. The one that used to eat worms and smash a fucking clock over his head. Low-key, I actually kind of dug that gimmick back in the day. I wasn't watching the product religiously during that time, but I would occasionally see clips pop up with the Boogeyman segments. My dad especially liked them. In fact, I remember him telling me one time, he should be the world champion. To which I said, you know, Dad, it's WWE in 2004, 2005, whenever the Boogeyman gimmick was around. There definitely could be worse options to put the world title on. So yeah, that was the thing. Only other comment I had was Norman accidentally dropping the word shit on live television when he mentioned that the Boogeyman used to sit on the edge of his bed at night while Norman read him stories. Pretty sure Norman accidentally said the word shit, which they did not bleep. And so that was a lead into Mike Rotunda versus the Cuban Assassin. What I think was easily the most boring, nothing happening match I've seen in my entire life. No joke. These guys did absolutely nothing in this match. It looked like 2 guys sleepwalking through spots in training school. God, it was so boring. Norman wheeled the black box out midway through. At that point, it was the most attention-grabbing thing in the entire segment. Whatever, I'll just cut to the chase. So Mike won this stupid match with an airplane spin. Then afterwards, Cactus Jack and Kevin Sullivan ran down to try to find out who was in the box. Surprise. It's Abdullah the Butcher. And even more surprising, it's Abby showing up as a face. Yeah. That was their 2-week build over the Black Box saga. They did all that rigmarole just to reveal Abby showing up for, I think, what wound up being a one-and-done appearance. or at the most, it was like 3 weeks. He wasn't around for long, I know that. I guess you can say it worked in the sense that the crowd popped for when Abby jumped out of the box. JC's right. Anybody that comes out of a box gets over. Now, was it the actual gimmick of the box that got the pop, or was it Abby being somewhat over? You can all debate that amongst yourselves. I remember this angle mainly because it was so campy and so random. Like, how in the world did Abdullah the Butcher fit in with any of this nonsense? I think that was the point. It was designed to be this arbitrary, unexpected appearance. Because I can't logically think of how Abby worked with anything in this storyline. Aside from the fact that Foley liked working with him, which, I mean, okay. And again, turns out the whole thing was done to try to get a ratings pop for all of a few weeks. Because that's how desperate WCW was in maintaining any kind of consistent audience. They had to resort to stuff like this. It was not the worst thing they booked in 1990, but it was definitely one of the weirder things they booked. So then we had Eddie Gilbert versus Jimmy Garvin, what they billed as one of the featured matches for the program this week. And I'll go ahead and start with this. This was a much better match than Mike Rotunda versus the Cuban Assassin. God, Eddie's look. I just can't get over how generic his appearance is now. The short brown hair, no beard, the short trunks. It just didn't suit him. Now, looking past that, these guys had a decent little TV match. I liked Garvin channeling his inner Buff Bagwell and constantly grandstanding for the camera throughout the match, fixing his hair, talking to Michael Hayes from the locker room, saying that he's got the match all under control. There was a great spot where he pulled Eddie's hair to keep a scissors hold applied, and right as the ref got done admonishing him, they kept the camera on Garvin long enough for him to do the little nod and wink at the camera. Great stuff. It sucks that Jimmy Garvin had such a bad superiority complex during this time, because he was truly a great worker. He was just way too pilled up to function properly. At some point, Cornette started going off on a tirade about Ivanka and Donald Trump. God, all these years later, that man is still living rent-free in Corny's head. The match did start to lose a bit of steam around the midway mark, when Garvin was working over Gilbert in a chin lock for like 8 minutes straight. But eventually the Rock and Roll Express came out to cheer on Eddie from ringside. The funny part is that even with Garvin having virtually the entire building working against him by this point, he was still actively kicking the shit out of Eddie for several more minutes. It also made the finish that much more hilarious, but I'll get to that in a minute. So the people rallied behind Eddie as he was getting worked over. I should say Ricky Morton rallied the people behind Eddie. And this finish, this was an astonishing finish. So let's keep in mind, The babyface in this match, supposedly, is Eddie Gilbert. The heel is supposed to be Jimmy Garvin. So they had the Rock and Roll come out to cheer on Eddie from ringside. And while they weren't directly interfering on Eddie's behalf yet, it was still essentially 3-on-1 advantage good guys. Even though the bad guy was still beating the ever-loving shit out of the babyface through all of it. And so, after the alleged hero spent 90% of the match getting beaten to a pulp, they do a spot where Eddie gets dumped to the floor, and as Jimmy tries to suplex him back into the ring from the apron, there's a distraction spot with Pee Wee Anderson that allows Ricky to trip up Garvin and allow Gilbert to steal the pin. So in the end, the story of this match was that the babyface was inferior to the heel in every way. And the only reason he won is because one of the other babyfaces tripped up the bad guy and cost him the match when he had the thing won. Something tells me the psychology of the booking here was a tad backwards. Now, I'm not saying there aren't scenarios where the heel should be presented as being a better wrestler than the babyface he's working with. But they really did Eddie dirty with the way he was presented here. They essentially admitted to the fact that there was no way in hell Eddie was going to win this match unless his friends bailed him out. Kind of a piss poor way to make your hero look relatable. When you have Jim Cornette making perfectly valid arguments about how the heel got screwed and that the babyfaces had no reason to be involved in this thing, period, he's not exactly wrong. It's not like Garvin was threatening to sodomize Gilbert with a rusty fishing knife. He literally outworked him. That is what Garvin did wrong, apparently. He showed that he was a better athlete than Eddie Gilbert was here. So that was a bit hard to buy. From there, we came back to rewatch the clip of Pillman and Zank recapturing their stolen U.S. tag belts from the Midnight Express last week, after the Midnights held them up and refused to give them back. It took the champs all of 30 seconds to thwart off the heels and reclaim their stolen property. Great effective way to make your heels look impactful. And so that led directly into Pillman and Zank versus Rick Fargo and Zan Panzer. At this point, they've completely dropped the fallout that Pillman selling any kind of throat injury after the tennis racket angle on TV 3 weeks back. He's perfectly fine now. It's like nothing ever happened. I determined here that Rick Fargo looked like Dr. Death if he had lost all his muscle mass. Yet he still looked less ridiculous than Zan Panzer, with that bright neon pink, whatever the fuck you call that outfit. Hideous is what I call it. So the champion spent a while beating these guys up. Corny trash talked them the whole time on commentary. In actuality, he spent more time trashing the teeny bopper girls with cheap perfume. But it was a reflection on them liking Pillman and Zank. His best jab was when he started talking about Tom Zank's fake relatives. The punchline was him using jewel names to describe his sisters, Ruby, Sapphire, and Pearl. Zank's name was Onyx because he was unexpected. I popped. It wasn't quite dad humor, but dark enough to still be both cornball and funny. Anyway, the champs got the win with a combo suplex dropkick spot. This is where I determined that every single match on this show was easily going to surpass 5 minutes. The fact that they gave this thing almost 8 minutes, it was mind-boggling. If Cornette didn't spend the whole time telling jokes and being a heel, I might have honestly used this as my piss break segment. So then we went to a pre-tape from NWA main event, what they billed as a special challenge match between the Steiners and the Minnesota Wrecking Crew 2. If you missed last week, that was Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos under masks, with Ole filling in as their temporary manager. They've obviously been building on the story of Scotty's injured left arm. The announcers cover that angle during the match and question the logic of Scott getting in the ring when he's working with an injury. Sidebar comment, since we're talking about the announcers here. Teddy Long was not a bad color commentator. He still had to be a heel, but I actually thought he had pretty good insight. I also liked how he kept calling him Bobby Caudle. But that dynamic actually worked, considering all the constant flipping with announce teams during this time. It was hard to find a pair of guys with natural chemistry on the headset. Still wasn't as good as Cornette and Ross, but I mean, nobody was as good as those two as a unit. It's not even a fair comparison. And so they ended up working the arm injury as a main part to the finish, where after the heels double-teamed Scotty behind the ref's back, they pulled him out to the floor and ran him into the ring post, which forced a count-out loss for the Steiners. Might have also been one of the fastest countouts I've ever seen from a wrestling official. It was almost like Pee Wee was looking for an excuse to award the match to the heels. He saw Scotty on the floor. He was like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ring the bell. I was like, shit, dude. How much did Ole pay him off to do a fast count? Again, keep in mind that all this Minnesota Wrecking Crew stuff with the mask guys was pretty much last minute. Arn went down with some kind of injury, but they didn't want to drop the feud cold turkey. So they got the idea to take Bloom and Enos and put them under masks to sort of carry on the feud with the Steiners and the Andersons. Although not directly. Come to think of it, I don't even know if Ole ever got back in the ring following Arn's injury. I seem to remember him solely being in the office after that point. But I could be wrong. We also had a Steiner pre-tape where Rick bumbled over himself and spoke incoherently for about 30 seconds. Then Scotty stole Road Warrior Hawk's weasel slapper catchphrase and promised that Ole Anderson was going to get slapped. And so that brought us to, well, the other quote-unquote big feature for the program. They promised everybody a Sting workout video at the top of the show. Now, I was fully expecting this to be like Midsouth 84 Fantastics level of insanity, with the camera crew following Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers onto every god-blessed machine in the gym, doing close-ups of their genetics. But no, this was far tamer in terms of intense workout routines. The whole thing was Sting on a bicycle machine talking about how he's gunning for Ric Flair as soon as he gets back. By the end of it, he was so out of breath he could barely finish his thought. It lasted all of like 90 seconds, if that. To be fair, though, they are trying to present the case that Sting might be coming back from his injury too soon, planting the seed of doubt that maybe the Stinger is toying too much with early retirement if he gets back in the ring before he's fully healed. So even though he's confident, there's still that lingering suspicion that he might be overexerting himself because his hatred for Ric Flair is so deep-rooted. I like how Sting's side hobby on his road to recovery is throwing darts at Ric Flair's face. That's all Sting's life is right now. It's eating, training, shitting, sleeping, and throwing darts at Flair. Something tells me he needs a new hobby. So that took us to even more replay footage. Now here we went back a week to see all the fallout that went down between Doom and the Road Warriors, where we got to see Teddy Long run out and punch Paul Ellering in the back of the head with a loaded boxing glove. Even going back and watching it on replay again, it was still funny watching it again. Like the way Teddy ran to the ring like a total cartoon character. Made even better by them doing the pre-tape with Doom and Teddy afterward. And Teddy is just beyond elated over getting the chance to knock out Ellering. And you can legitimately see Simmons and Reed laughing for a shoot as Teddy's putting over how great the whole angle was. Teddy was funny, man. I never made any claims that he wasn't a good manager back in the day. When he was an on-screen personality, he always made his segments count. Speaking of things that I found funny, watching the Road Warriors destroy Joe Kazana and Hacksaw Higgins. This brought back some nostalgia from those old NWA studio shows when the Road Warriors would just run out and absolutely steamroll local job guys in less than 30 seconds. There was never anything pretty about it. Most of the time they were bowling shoe ugly. But it was always fun watching the jobbers be completely clueless of how to feed for hawk and animal. Now this went a little longer than most of their old studio matches, but they still got destroyed. Then they did a promo afterward, basically vowing that they would get even with Teddy for what he did the other week to Paul. The best part was when Animal got done with his promo, and he went to do the Tell 'em Hawk bit. And Hawk legitimately had nothing to say. So he just went, "Well, it ain't easy being us. What a rush." And there was like 10 whole seconds of awkward silence until JR finally caught on to the fact that, oh, this guy's not going to say anything else. Awesome. So prior to the TV main event, they went ahead and replayed a piece of the Luger Flair title match from Wrestle War. And I'll be honest, I skipped over that part because, well, one, we've already reviewed it. No sense in beating a dead horse and going over the whole finish again. It still sucks, by the way. Not going to sugarcoat that. Then we get Cactus Jack versus Chris Powers. It was originally supposed to be Kevin Sullivan wrestling, but apparently he decided he didn't want to wrestle this week. So he made Cactus do his dirty bidding for him. And so he beat up Powers while Sullivan occasionally interfered on the floor while Nick Patrick wasn't looking. They do a spot where Cactus exposed the ring mat so he could do the big apron elbow drop onto the concrete. That was how he scored the pinfall. At which point, Sullivan got on the house mic and called out Abby and Norman for a fight. And as they waddled their way down to the ring, it was at that point where I finally realized they actually managed to find someone more obese than Norman the Lunatic in this storyline. Incredible to think that's even humanly possible. And so they all fought outside the ring and threw each other around into furniture for a few minutes. There were multiple spots here where the heels kept bumping and stumbling into each other. I was sure that somebody was actually going to get hurt for a shoot here. Again, though, the crowd was into everything. I can't in good faith shit on the concept entirely, knowing that people enjoyed it so much. Of course, who doesn't love a good old-fashioned brawl? It's a lot to ask of me personally to care about this feud, especially accounting for the silliness of the whole ordeal. Yeah, but the fact that the whole thing was basically being done as a short-term thing to try to pop a number, I mean, it was harmless enough, I guess. It still means we're going to have to watch Abby in the ring, and Christ knows that was hard to watch in Dallas in 1986, much less having to see him do it several years later with an even more broken down body. It'll probably be some kind of falls count anywhere, anything goes, arena brawl type thing. So I'm sure it'll get over in whatever venue they end up doing the match in. But yeah, that was the show. Again, they're getting progressively harder to sit through. There's far less material for me to talk about at great length. But because everything's so formulaic and watered down with how the syndicated shows are presented, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to find subtle nuances to talk about during the squashes or pre-tapes. And I can rattle off some insider stuff or behind-the-scenes drama, what was going on with the booking committee. But the shows speak for themselves in terms of how that backstage drama translated to the product. You know, we're still well over a month away from Capital Combat 2. We haven't even heard them reference RoboCop yet. God, just wait until that shit kicks in. You thought the WWE doing shameless sponsor plugs was annoying? Wait till WCW name drops RoboCop in every other segment on the show. You'll be begging for more Slim Jim plugs. By the way, I don't know if y'all can hear that tsunami in the background. The torrential downpour. It was actually worse about 15 minutes ago. I'm trying to record this part of the review while it's still drizzling. But if you do hear a thunderstorm rumbling in the background, sorry. Not much I can do to filter it out. Okay, so this was the week on Midsouth where they officially began the TV title tournament. Even though it was technically supposed to begin last week, but didn't. For reasons that were explained. And so they went ahead and showed the brackets for all the seeds. let me first begin by saying technology advancement has come a long way since the 80s. It's one thing for them to flash up a giant poster board with all the names scribbled on there, in pencil, by the way, with horrible handwriting. But to also have to try to read all of that in low resolution with a jerky camera. Thank God for Jim Ross actually running everything down verbally. Elsewise, I don't think I would have had a single clue who was in this tournament. So here's what we had as opening round matches. Again, trying to spot check all of this with a camera that was having trouble focusing. Jim Duggan got a bye in the opening round. We had Tim Horner versus Tom Pritchard, which we'll talk about in a bit. Terry Daniels versus Dr. Death. Jake Roberts versus Brad Armstrong. And Steve Casey versus Chris Adams, who I believe was ranked number 2 in the seed. Chris Adams, that is. In addition to them going over the rules of each tournament round, the fact that disqualifications count as eliminating an individual from the tournament, they also specified that each round has a 15-minute time limit, and should a particular round go to a 15-minute draw, that round would be rematched the following week on TV to determine an actual winner, which I guess would imply that the rematch also can't surpass the 15-minute mark. And in that case, I'm not sure what would happen. Other than not being able to read the actual graphic when they put it up, the tournament itself is kind of hit and miss. Like when you look at the actual star power here, there's a fairly big gap between the main event or top of the card stars versus what you would probably coin the middle card guys. Also kind of interesting that there's no Butch Reed or Ted DiBiase in this tournament. But there's only like 2 names that you could foresee actually going over here. It's a toss-up between Roberts or Duggan. And since there really wasn't a story purpose for Duggan to win the TV title during this time, kind of leaves Jake as the last man standing. Well, we'll see what they do. We had a couple tournament rounds this week. We will cover those in a bit. We did briefly shift the focus over to a leftover angle from last week. And that was everything surrounding the post-match with Kamala, Akbar, Friday, and Terry Taylor. Mainly Terry giving Friday the pile driver on the concrete floor and supposedly putting him out of wrestling for good. That is what JR claimed before he pitched to the video. So, presumably that angle was done to write Friday out of the picture altogether. But now things are even more chaotic when it comes to the dynamic between Kamala and General Akbar. Without Friday around, Akbar has even less control over Kamala's whereabouts than he did before. He might be even more unhinged than ever before. So he warned Terry in his promo here that he's a marked man. I did like in this promo, after Akbar got finished with the big tirade, they kept the camera on him long enough just to see him gently put the microphone down and look at the camera, as if to signal, did you get all that? Gotta love awkward fourth wall breaking. So then we went to the ring for our first of 2 TV title matches this week. It's Tom Pritchard versus Tim Horner. Now, by all accounts, they went in presenting it as a straight-ahead babyface match between 2 guys on similar levels as talents. Although I would still argue that Dr. Tom was light years better than Tim Horner as an overall talent. Maybe not so much here in 1985. Definitely a better wrestler, though. By the end of it, he showcased why he was a big star waiting to happen. So they're out there working a pretty status quo babyface match. The crowd wasn't really into it because I think they had a hard time picking and choosing sides, knowing that it wasn't a traditional babyface versus heel dynamic. That, and let's be honest, these guys have never been presented as big stars on this show. That was until the closing minutes, when Dr. Tom pulled the ultimate swerve. They do a spot where Horner takes a bump out to the floor, and he's downselling his neck for a minute before Tom goes out and teases that he's going to be sportsmanlike and help Horner back into the ring. But you see, this is a TV title tournament, damn it. There's money at stake. So Dr. Tom surveys the situation. He realizes that Tim Horner's on the cusp of losing anyway. So Tom says, to hell with it. I'm just going to drop this fucker over the guardrail and take my count-out win. Which is precisely what he did. That part was so great. I legitimately popped when Tom picked Horner up and draped him over the guardrail. Now that's the dastardly Tom Pritchard that I grew up knowing and loving. Fuck that run-of-the-mill babyface garbage. This is great. And so Dr. Tom advances to round 2. If I remember the brackets correctly, I believe that puts him in line to wrestle Duggan next, which I think most of us know how that's all going to go down. But this was still a fun segment. And then coming back, we had Brickhouse Brown versus Thor. I was getting ready to comment on whether or not it would be a contest between Brickhouse or Kerry Von Erich and who could try to get a more watchable match out of the future Nails. And then before I could really come to any sensible conclusion, Brickhouse won with a flying double axe to the back of Thor for the pin. So I guess by default, Brickhouse would have to win that contest. Because at least this match was short compared to the one Thor had with Kerry the other week. Again, we've talked about how Brickhouse got to come back the other week and get one of those second big run pushes. It's still an uphill battle in trying to get the fans to rally behind him. It's not working, for one. I think the fans can smell the shit stain through the flower bed, if you know what I mean. Like, they know it's Watts trying to replace JYD. They're not dumb. They've been picking up on that scent for well over 6 months now. And I'm not saying I disagree with that collective mindset. If I were a Midsouth fan in 1985 going to see these shows live, especially knowing how big JYD was to the overall bottom line of the company, going to these shows in person and seeing Watts trying to force feed another top black babyface on me like that when it doesn't seem organic, I'd be calling bullshit too. It's just the nature of the beast. And then we had the Barbarian taking on Richard Dye, billed from the state of North Carolina. That was the moment that I knew this was going to be one of those squashes. It's so bad it's entertaining type squashes. I just had a gut hunch You ever watch those old school squash matches where you just know that the job guy has no earthly clue what he's doing? So you can actively see the star he's working with make things as idiot-proof as possible. That's what it was like watching the Barbarian try to work with this guy. When it became so painfully obvious that Richard Dye was incapable of doing a basic standalone collar and elbow lockup, that's when the Barbarian said, "All right, I gotta think fast. How can I dumb this match down as much as possible so that even this moron can understand what I'm trying to do?" And so the match basically boiled down to 4 or 5 basic moves. They did a series of lockup attempts where the Barbarian just sort of shoved Dye to the mat. He gave him the world's gentlest body slam. He did a rib stomp, which was about as protective as you can make something like that look in a working fashion. And then he finally put him away with a full Nelson submission. On the scale of all-time horrible jobber matches, I have definitely seen far worse on those old NWA studio shows during the Crockett era. But this is still pretty damn awful. John Nord was not a bad worker by any stretch, but he was also not a miracle worker. He knew what he was up against here. It was the worst example of how to make a beast-like heel look beastly and or intimidating. Put him in the ring with a job guy that doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. That'll expose you quickly. Now, take something like that and compare that to a similar situation like what we had with Brad Armstrong versus Edgar Boo Thomas. A greener than a pepper tree rookie who barely knew the basics and fundamentals, now being put in a featured singles showcase after, debuting a month ago? And it's been a hot minute since we've seen Thomas. I believe his debut feature was that tag match with Dr. Death a few weeks back. And even there, he barely did much of anything. So it's obvious that he spent some time training and getting ready to work bigger showcase matches. And this one he had with Brad, it was so much better than I was anticipating. In fact, they actually got the crowd into it by the end. And their formula wasn't all that elaborate. They worked the story early on that Edgar was out wrestling Brad with some amateur takedowns, but because he was green, he kept going over to seek Dr. Death's approval after he would do something moderately impressive. So Brad would take advantage and get control back. There was a spot where Brad got tripped up in the ropes during a shoot-off, which allowed Thomas to take over. It was a good camera angle, too, because they never deliberately showed Dr. Death tripping him up. But it was clear that it was him. And so that allowed Thomas to get some heat until the finish, where he went to try to do a big fancy splash off the middle rope. Then Brad turned that into a sunset roll-up and got the 3. Where immediately after the bell, you see Dr. Death flipping his lid and throwing a fit in the ring while Brad escapes untouched. This totally worked. I mean, it was easy to tell that they caked walk through a lot of it beforehand. Not that they pre-planned the whole match out move for move. But it's obvious that Brad and Thomas sat down here and went over some key critical spots that needed to happen. And it was fine. It all came together well in execution. Now, did that help the mask the fact that Edgar Boo Thomas still wasn't a very good pro wrestler? No. But it did help to show that he could at least be carried to something. So for what it's worth, credit to Brad. And Dr. Death. Because he probably weighed on in some stuff here too. So good on him. It was kind of interesting how they had Dr. Death teaming with Jake Roberts this week to face Shawn Michaels and Terry Daniels, as opposed to just having him team with his protege. Made for a much better match, though. Now, one thing Joel mentioned on commentary here, and it was more or less a passing comment, but they were putting over the courage of Shawn for being able to get back in the ring after having been mauled by Kamala last week. And Joel flat out said, Shawn Michaels is a future star in the making. Well, he certainly was not wrong, was he? As love-hate as my relationship has been with Shawn throughout his career, I will not ever deny the fact that he was a big star. Even if it came with the caveat that he was also a big royal pain in the ass to deal with. This is actually a more competitive tag match than you would probably think on paper. They gave Shawn a lot of shine here, especially during the beginning and closing stages. Got to make a small babyface comeback on Dr. Death, which goes to show how much faith Watts had in him. And he had a flurry going until Williams cut him off and hurled him across the ring with a one-arm body slam. And then Jake tagged in and gave him the DDT for the pin. Great sell job from Michaels, too. He put over that DDT perfectly. It's a bummer that the Roberts-Williams pairing was one of those fleeting one-time only type deals. Like, seeing them work together here, they probably could have made a solid top heel tag team. Like, they were different heels in terms of the style they worked, but it was almost like one of those Butch Reed, Buddy Landel pairings where the oddness of their heelish styles made them click more. Just an observation. And so then we had the second of our two TV title rounds this week. It's Steve Casey taking on Gentleman Chris Adams. Also important to remember that the winner of this match would receive a bye in round 2. Just like how Duggan received a bye for the first round. Now, we talked the other week about Steve Casey. Moreover, I spent like 5 minutes trying to figure out who the hell this Steve Casey was compared to the other two Steve Caseys that I know about in wrestling. Come to find out, he was neither of the two I was thinking of. The funny thing is, I was still unable to find any information about him on the web beyond what I already uncovered the other week. That he had a short run in Midsouth and apparently never wrestled anywhere else. Or at least nowhere else I could find. So knowing all of that ahead of time, I was kind of disappointed when I saw the finish of this match. 100% wrong guy won in my book. Like, I understand Adams was on a pay per appearance type deal, a handshake deal, so to speak. So you couldn't have him go through the whole tournament knowing Watts wasn't going to have him booked for another month or so on television. The wrestling here was perfectly fine, although Adams clearly outperformed Casey in almost every avenue. The best spot here was when he gave Casey the super kick, and Casey took a big flip bump over the top to the floor and sort of like somebody shot him out of a cannon. But again, they still had to put Casey over. So they went with the DQ finish where Adams tried to give Casey a big splash from the top rope. But then Ronnie West waved the match off and awarded it to Casey. And that set up the post-match where Adams tried to get some heat back on himself by tying up Casey's arms in the ropes. But then he got sidestepped and run off. And so that basically seats Casey all the way to the finals of the tournament, since he also gets a second round bye. Kind of a weird scenario if it ends up being Jake Roberts versus Steve Casey, but I mean, that logically would have to be the direction they're going, at least in terms of what appear to be the most probable outcomes of the tournament. If it's not already apparent, by the way, I have no memory of anything regarding this tournament. So this is all stuff that I'm blindly watching, having no knowledge of the outcome. There's actually a lot of gray area for me in Midsouth between like now and I would say the fall period. I remember sporadic bits and pieces of things that happened in Midsouth in '85, at least between late spring and early fall. But it's not a ton. So that took us to Paul Brown and Jack Victory versus Terry Taylor and Kerry Von Erich. One thing I neglected here was that they still had a Jim Duggan video feature they wanted to show before the program ended. So when I looked at the timeline, I realized, oh, they still got about 5 minutes left. And then this match went less than 90 seconds. I was like, well, that was quick. The hell are they going to do for another 4 minutes? Well, forgot about the video. This squash was everything you would expect it to be. The babyfaces won with a double pinfall. Who was legal? Who actually got the proper pin? Who cares? The ladies got to see two good-looking genetic freaks team up and beat some ass. They didn't give a fuck. As far as the whole video feature goes with Duggan, it was him and famous country singer and song producer John Anderson. They met up at some music club in Tulsa, Oklahoma to do a number together. And by that, I mean, Duggan introduced him on stage and the John Anderson band played Black Sheep while everybody danced. I do not purport to be a country music expert myself, but I do know some John Anderson tunes. They also showed tape of them on John's touring bus, shooting the shit with the camera team and making passing jokes about the road life. I love the tongue-in-cheek response when John asked Duggan if he enjoyed the road life as much as him. And you can see Duggan kind of smile at the camera like, yeah, it's definitely fun. Just gritting his teeth the whole time. He was so full of shit, you could tell. Especially having listened to Cornette cover his Mid-South run in '84 and talk about the wonky-ass road schedule Watts had them doing. There is no fucking way that Duggan was about to say he enjoyed the travel. I wouldn't believe him if he told me. But it was a fun video. Nice to see those crossovers back in the day when wrestlers were seen as big enough attractions to where they could hang around with other top stars from different industries, and it just kind of seemed natural, you know? Like, I could buy that Jim Duggan and John Anderson would legitimately hang out and drink a beer together, regardless of whether or not it was done as a publicity stunt. was also nice to see a time when the music scene wasn't totally rotten. Now everyone's bopping their heads to Billie Eilish and all these fake canned pop stars and all their overproduced, watered down music. Sorry to anybody that's actually into that kind of stuff. Not my flavor by any stretch. But there you go. I think that's all I got for this one. And I managed to get this all recorded before the next passing storm comes through. It is going to be quite rainy over the next several days. So if you live anywhere in Ohio, bring an umbrella with you. But that'll do it for now. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate everybody that comes out to check the show every week. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and leave a like for me. Follow us on either YouTube or Rumble. And I will talk to you all soon. Take care. Peace out.